Hi, everyone. I'm Don Cooper, the Executive Director of the Event Safety Alliance. For those of you who've supported us for the last year, thank you so much. For those of you who are just learning about us, welcome. We at the ESA believe safety should be part of every decision we make, that safety is everyone's responsibility, and that we must watch out for each other. In this time of getting back to work and re-engaging our muscle memory, please be patient with yourself as well as others until we all get back to doing what we love. Thank you for being with us, and please stay safe.
Welcome to our last session of today. We have a really great one for our final thing. It's accessibility, safety, and the new normal, question mark.
The new normal? Meaning what, Danielle?
Well, we had a conversation earlier. It's like, was it ever normal before? We're not sure. Maybe we just thought it was. But we're in this weird place with the pandemic where it is kind of toward the end. Maybe we hope so. But we're doing stuff again. So
yeah, I've got fingers crossed. I've got body parts crossed that I didn't know I had before the pandemic. So let's turn to our last smart friend for today. This is Betty Siegel from the Kennedy Center for the Arts in Washington, D.C. We love Betty. We've had her on the Event Safety Podcast twice already. And well, because there is a vast universe of things about accessibility at events that we don't know, we turn to Betty Siegel because she does. And Betty speaks well and speaks our language. And so smart friends unite. Yay, Betty Siegel.
Yay!
Welcome back.
Welcome back.
Thank you. It's always so much fun to join the two of you all on a podcast, on a call, on a Zoom. You stimulate lots of amazing conversation.
And now you're on Event Safety TV.
I love that. Can I tell my mom?
If
tell
you
your
have
mom.
Human form.
That's true. So what are we going to talk about today, Steve? You usually have a million thoughts and questions.
Well, my thought, given who you are and your area of expertise, Betty Siegel at the Kennedy Center, is tell us things about accessibility, such as what does that word actually mean in the context of live events, since you are an expert in this area and you work in a live event space?
Absolutely. Oh, no problem. I mean, I love that question. Accessibility in its broadest sense, means just do people and our communities have access to all of the work that we do? From my perspective, though, I'm always looking through the lens of disability, right? So accessibility for people with disabilities of all ages. And so accessibility to me means ensuring that every single event, activity, performance at the Kennedy Center and in institutions and public spaces across the United States are considering what it means to be truly accessible to every member of their community. And we want to really focus on the way in which we can be more inclusive and less exclusive. So access to me just means good customer service. It means good community relationships. It means thoughtful approaches to difficult and challenging issues.
So when you talk about a disability, what all sorts of things are you considering?
Well, when we talk about disability in the legal sense, there's lists of what a disability is considered to be, a significant impairment of a major life function, which really is kind of meaningless. But disability for us is, first of all, it's an identity. So we're dealing with the issues of identity and identifying as a person with a disability. And then we're dealing with people who don't identify as being people with disabilities, like my 95-year-old mother, who if you asked her if she had a disability would be like, what? No. But I happen to know that she has a significant hearing loss because sitting in the theater with her when she's not using an assistive listening system or using captioning in the theater or during a performance is a painful experience, because every 3 seconds it's the elbow in the side and the much louder than she thinks she is statement of what did they say? So it's the entire range of disabling conditions from mental health and mental illness issues to physical to brain-based disabling conditions. So it's everything. It's, it's interesting because we talk about disability like it's something special and unique over here, when in reality, what we really have to do is train ourselves to think about disability as being just the human condition.
That's
We're
beautiful.
all going to experience it.
That's actually a really different way of conceiving of disabilities than what I was thinking. And, I know some hearing impaired people in my world too. And I never thought about that in the context of what you do. But I guess it is, isn't it? Age is
Absolutely.
itself a form of common disability creating situation.
Absolutely. Age-related disabling conditions are very common, which is why I say that we have to stop thinking about disability as being this special thing for this special group of people that are all over there, and start thinking about it as being this thing that we do for ourselves, for our families, for our friends, for our colleagues, because it is just the normal way in which human beings are going to exist. So that's the philosophical part of this discussion.
I love that.
You
Yeah,
know,
that's basically saying we want to welcome everyone, however you get here, and however we
absolutely.
can make it so that you can participate.
Absolutely. And then, the thinking part of this is to remember that when we look at our audiences, and we have such diverse audiences, for example, at the Kennedy Center, because we're serving everybody from families with very young children to those older adults. And I try to coach my team to remember that the types of disabling conditions that we're going to encounter do vary depending on who that audience is. Because if we're talking about a student based audience where we've got field trips coming in, 14% of all students in public schools today have an IEP, or an individualized education plan, which means they've been diagnosed or they're presenting themselves as being individuals with disabilities. That's 14% of the general student population. But in that 14%, over 56% of those kids have learning disabilities or specific language speech disabling conditions. That's very different than when you look at the aging population, where the most common disabling conditions are things like hearing, vision, cognition, and mobility. So depending who the audience is, the type of expectations or the type of things my staff should be prepared to accommodate are going to be different.
It's interesting. We talk about that sort of customization in our risk assessments, where you say, who's coming? What can we expect from that particular group? In all areas of safety, which is the pivot point I was looking for. It's like, where does accessibility and safety intersect?
Absolutely. I mean, it's in those statistics again. Let's keep in mind that now this set of statistics I'm going to talk about a little bit might be a little old, but I still think they are fairly representative. But internationally, you have 1 billion people with disabilities. In that population, is it 1 billion? Or is it more, Steve? I saw your face. I saw you make a face. I think it's around
No,
1
my
billion.
face was, oh my God, that's an enormous number.
Yeah, and most of the time we think that number is significantly undercounted because different countries count disability differently than one another. So you're dealing with the differences in how people count disability. So I talked about the American definition of disability, which is driven by our laws. It's really broad. Other countries count it much more narrowly. But if we've got, of those people across the world who have disabilities, only like 2 to 2.3% have significant, or what we would call, really, really complex or comorbid conditions. And then 12% of those people have moderate to mild disabling conditions. That means something like 82 to 85% of the world population of people with disabilities have really what we call mild disabling conditions. So they're more like my mom in makeup, right? And so when we talk about what does that mean when we look at safety, and the work that you all do every day, it means that 82 to 85% of the people with disabilities that are in our audiences are probably not going to need anything much more complex than those people without disabilities. It's only when we look at that smaller population of moderate to severe disabling conditions that you start to get into needing to make all those really more complicated or customized adaptations or accommodations for the disability itself.
And I'll tell you what I'm thinking about as you're saying this stuff, Betty. Couple of things. One, there are a lot more people with some form of disability than I ever thought about. And two, I'm used to the placards that show somebody in a wheelchair, but the degree to which one can readily perceive that someone has a disability is actually probably a lot lower than at least I was thinking about, because they're not all going to be in wheelchairs. They might have something that we can't even visibly perceive, but they still need some kind of accommodation. Is that more or less right?
Yeah, I think that's really on the nose. I think that we have a tendency to think that we're going to be able to look at someone and go, oh, they have a disability. And the truth is that you can't. Most disabilities are invisible. So they're not something that you look at someone and go, oh, they have a disability. Like, can you see someone has a mental health issue? I don't think so. Most of the time, you can't even see whether somebody has a vision issue. What you do see a lot of times when you identify people as being people with disabilities is you see their tools, the tools they use themselves to get around the world, like the wheelchair, like a walker, like a cane, like glasses, like a white cane for somebody who's blind or a service dog. But you very rarely see somebody's disability. Think about all of the people who have a number of our returning veterans with prosthetics. If you have a prosthetic on your leg and you're wearing long pants, I don't know, Steve, I can't see you below the waist, but you're not going to see that prosthetic at all. Okay, good.
So,
For the record, I'm wearing long pants for a change. It's mid-November.
So basically, we just need to be inclusive in our safety planning, having messages that are both audible and visual, keeping walkways free and accessible for all patrons, and the vast majority of our people with some challenges would be just in the general population, right? That's what I heard you say?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you don't incorporate planning into your planning for these emergency situations, that humankind is incredibly diverse.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times we call that thinking universal design. Are you designing universally? Or I like to think of it as human-centered design, because humans are going to have disabilities just as a part of their normal condition. And if you incorporate that into your overall plans and stop thinking about it as something that you add on or layer on after the fact, or that you're just doing for this little special group of people over there, you're going to be much safer for everyone, and B, you're going to reach people without having to make that effort in the moment, right? Like, what's the worst thing that happens to event safety staff? I think it's that you have to mitigate situations where you're in there dealing with individual human beings. And if we plan for access from the get-go, you won't have to deal with 82% of the people with disabilities in your population, because the environment you've created is going to support them.
So, Betty, I have a question about self-identification. So we're talking about planning right now, and I suspect this is a hot button issue. I imagine that it would be easier to plan for accommodations if people, as they buy a ticket or register to attend an event, would identify that they need some kind of accommodation and what that is. Does that happen? Is that even permissible under, we're three Americans, so under US law? How does that work?
Oh my goodness. No, people do not have to tell you that they have a disability. And it is under most conditions would be illegal in the United States to ask someone what their disability is. Now, in in the world of the Americans with Disabilities Act, there's this whole section on ticketing regulations where they do dive into this. And what you are allowed to ask someone only once and only up front at the time of ticket sale is, do you or a member of your party have a disability? And the reason why you're allowed to ask that question is you're trying to identify what accommodate if they need an accommodation like a wheelchair accessible location. But what that disability is none of your business. And if you're trying to drill down and start to ask them what kind of disability you have, then you're asking the wrong questions that can and will get you in trouble. But you can, at the time of a ticket sale, the initial sale, you can ask them if a member of their party, they or a member of their party has a disability.
Is there, so I know that we are getting into American law here. Is there a way to ask someone, do you require an accommodation? Or is that
Wow.
also not permitted?
Do you ask everybody that question? Like, how do you know who to ask that question to? Because if most
Well, like,
disabilities are mild and not visible to the naked eye, you wouldn't know to ask my mom that question. First of all, she'd probably slap you upside the head, but
well, she would probably deny that she needs an accommodation.
that too.
But
Absolutely.
like I'm thinking about, when you get invited to attend somebody's wedding, they ask, do you have any food allergies? Do you eat pork or meat or something like that? And you can answer that question. So is there some analogy for providing accommodations to people who either require them or request them?
Well, first of all, it's if people want to tell you about their disability, that's their choice, right? And people sometimes will, and they will self-identify, and that is their decision to make, not yours. Um, I think what we have to do is create spaces and environments in which people feel comfortable letting you know, not necessarily that they have a disability, but what do they need? What do you, as an audience member, need to enjoy this experience in my venue or fully participate in this experience in my venue? Um, I try to, again, this is my approach, which is to train front of house staff to stop focusing on what people's disability is and instead focus on what do people need. Anyone, like Steve, what do you need to come into to watch a baseball game or a football game and be comfortable and happy? You need a seat. You want a seat with arms maybe, or there's some people who would prefer to have a seat without arms. What do you need? You want to sit in the sun, not sit in the sun?
Yeah, I guess I want information. Personally, I'm a big fan of wayfinding signage. I
Oh,
don't like
yeah.
being lost.
Mm,
Um, so that's important to me. But I see your point. It's a matter of asking the questions and then, paying attention to the answers in a given set of circumstances.
absolutely. I mean, Danielle, you deal with the public, I'm sure. How do you get to that? You brought up the term customized, which I love because customizing the experience means that you're looking at the individual and you're making sure that that human being is feeling safe and comfortable and accommodated in the space of the event. But what were you thinking? I'm going to put this back on you. What were you thinking when you used that term customized?
Well, I guess I was thinking about so at my venue, I don't typically control ticket sales. So I have no communication with our guests before they arrive.
Right.
So it's just whatever is available or whatever people call and ask about. So we try to be as universally prepared as possible. And a lot of times, as you said, we sort of consider what the makeup of the audience is to get sort of a guess.
Right.
We did this is a long time ago at this point, but we did a classic gospel concert And the audience was primarily median age 85. So in our planning, we had to allow extra time for ingress and egress. And we had a lot of people with mobility issues. So it was just being aware of who's coming. I've been working with we have a office called SOAR, and they handle accessibility issues for the campus. I've been working with them about improving our signage, or Steve's wayfinding, so that people who specifically may be in a wheelchair or may need to sit, and we have fixed seats. And if those don't work for a person, we have some other areas available so that people can find those on their own without needing someone to come up to them and say, let me help you. Because a lot of times people prefer to just know where they're going. I guess stuff like that, where we're trying to make the facility work in every circumstance, which, don't know that. Sorry, I'm kind of processing as I'm talking. I feel like it's a goal. I don't know that I'll ever reach it, but just keep working towards it.
Yeah. I mean, I think some of the issues around wayfinding that Steve is bringing up is that what we all, I think, try to do and should strive to do is to create these environments in which we address as many issues as we possibly can anticipate, right? For the general human being that's going to come in based on what we know about our different audiences. And wayfinding is a big one. When I see someone in a wheelchair accessible location, I don't want necessarily for my front of house staff going up to them going, oh, let me just make sure that if there's an emergency, like, when there's a shooter or a fire or, and then you have to list all the things that could possibly go wrong. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, that person, instead of enjoying the show or what the event is like, suddenly going, that you've made them really nervous. I don't want them going up there. In the case of all these things, you, instead of exiting to the left, are going to exit to the right? Because the accessible emergency evacuation route is that way, and it's different than the non-accessible. So how do you address that issue? Well, signage, right? Because you don't want your house staff approaching every visibly disabled human being. First of all, you won't be able to do it. And then they're panicking because they're now pulled out of the moment that they're in and worrying more about what their own personal safety is going to be. Instead, wouldn't it just be nice if you had signage up that said, exit wheelchair, like with the little wheelie symbol, and that the environment itself was structured in a way that made it really clear where people should go. So that whole pre-planning wayfinding has to apply to the emergency situations as much as just to
ingress.
Yeah.
So, Betty, the timing of this conversation today is something that we had planned months ago when we first chatted with you and your friends at the Kennedy Center. And we were going to have this chat live in person in beautiful Lidditz, Pennsylvania. And instead, once again, we are wondering if you have a corporeal form because we haven't seen you in person in years. We miss you.
I'm just a hologram.
Yeah, exactly. Welcome to the metaverse.
Good Lord. So where we are in the world right now and where you are at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., slowly peering around the corner of the pandemic, the conversation we have had so far, how has it been changed or not by this global pandemic?
Well, so
discuss in 2 minutes, please.
It's a softball question.
How much time do we have? Well, first off, I think that we do have to remember that, yes, we are dealing with extraordinary circumstances that people in my generation haven't dealt with before, or yours. I've not lived through a pandemic personally, but I have now. But I think what we have to remember.
That generation comment, how old do you think Danielle and I are?
Well, Well, it's funny because, of course, my mom is 95 and she lived through, as a child, lived through the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma because that's where she grew up. And so it was very interesting early on to kind of have conversation with her about that experience compared to the experience that we're having now. So she actually has kind of dealt with two significant natural disasters in a sense. But I think that what people forget is just because we're in this extraordinary situation does not mean that the federal disability rights or civil rights laws are suddenly null and void. They still are the law of the land. And so you have to plan for these extraordinary conditions, taking into consideration the fact that people's rights just didn't go away the minute that we all shut down or stopped operating in our usual manner and started operating in a new and different way. So we still have to consider things like accommodations. What accommodations can we make for people in our venues? Given current circumstances, we still have to consider that they do have rights that we have to acknowledge and support. So that's a baseline, is that those rights did not go away. So when you have when you are looking at your COVID policies, whatever they are, wherever you happen to be, and you are merging together, federal policy, local, state, and city and county policy, and then you're layering on human rights issues, civil rights issues, disability rights issues. It's really can get complicated, but you have an obligation to consider those things in the creation of your policies, procedures, and practices. And if you don't, then you need to be prepared to modify your policies, procedures, and practices in order to accommodate people with disabilities. Does that mean that people with disabilities get to do whatever the heck they want to do and they don't have to abide by the rules? No. Whew. No, that's not true. Because you still have life safety issues, which you all are much better suited to discuss than I am.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because one thing we know from all the other things is that the pandemic doesn't mean that you don't still plan for security issues. You don't still plan for weather. You still don't plan for, you still advance a show just like you always did. You just added in another piece to consider. So this is just one more piece, is the accessibility. So
right.
are there specific things that you've learned in terms of good ways to manage all those pieces together? Specifically COVID, proof of vaccination, mask policies, things like that.
I've learned
2 minutes.
I've learned that where we were in March of 2020 is a really different place than where we are today, because the issues and the angst and the stress and the conversations we were having in March, April, May are very different than they are right now. And the courts have it's been long enough now that people have been able to go in front of the courts to ask for some decisions on certain issues like mask wearing or not mask wearing. I'm finding that if we build in our policies a certain level of flexibility, or build in options and alternatives. So to come to the Kennedy Center, and this is Kennedy Center specifically, you do have to remember that the Kennedy Center is a federal building, so we don't necessarily operate under local state regulations. We operate under federal regulation. We do require that our audiences, if they want to go into a theater, now open public space, because we're also a memorial to John F. Kennedy, that in those spaces, there's a little bit more flexibility. We are requiring people, we are asking people to wear their masks, but to go into a theater proper, we are asking people to show us proof of vaccination, or a PCR test taken within the past 72 hours that shows that you do not have COVID at that moment. So we gave them two choices. It could be this one or this one. If we'd just done one, we would be eliminating a lot of people, including a lot of people with disabilities who, for reasons of their disability, aren't able to be vaccinated. We don't want to eliminate anybody. Remember, we want to be more inclusive, less exclusive. So we gave them two choices. And even now we are looking at and reviewing with our health advisors at the Cleveland Clinic. We're reviewing whether we should open that up and actually give people a third choice, which is vaccination, PCR test, or antigen test sometime, within the last 6 hours, which again, just gives people more and more options and more choices. A lot of theaters are also finding that another choice they can offer people is you can attend live or you can attend virtual. Now, the Kennedy Center hasn't gone there as much, but some of the other venues around the country have been able to do that. So again, it's just another choice, because what you want to do is make sure that the information is clear, right, Steve? That was such an important point you made. You give people sufficient information to make choices for themselves. And so if they know those are the choices and those are the options, then it's up to them to decide whether this is going to be a safe environment or an environment in which they're going to be comfortable.
So I want to underscore the point that you and Danielle just made as a transition to our last topic for this conversation. But the point I want to underscore is, Betty, a lot of the things that you have discussed so far, we could have had the same conversation before March 2020. The focus on making spaces accessible for all, that's part of the mission that we all have. The focus on doing that in a way that doesn't make people think about their safety to the exclusion of enjoying the event. Because after all, that's why they leave their living room in the first place. They're looking for a different, happier experience, a more complete, joyful experience than they could get just watching it on a video monitor like today. Sorry, people. So a lot of the discussions that we've had throughout today with our mini summit are variations, sort of pandemic-induced variations on themes that we could have easily discussed before the pandemic started. And so even as, generally speaking, the law hasn't changed, the ADA is still the same law that it was, the basic rules of engagement, we still have to pay attention to security, to severe weather, to, wayfinding signage, my own pet thing. Those are all just standard things that we always have to pay attention to. And now, to trot out my favorite legal standard, to behave reasonably under the circumstances includes acknowledging that we are at this stage of the pandemic. And tomorrow we'll be at a different stage.
Yeah.
And we'll have to pay attention to that too.
Absolutely. The thing with planning, especially in the work that you all are doing and in accessibility, is that you want to, like I said, anticipate in advance, be ready for the unexpected or the more complex, complicated situation, so that you have, your staff knows what to do. Like what to do if something seems not in the routine of how we were trained to work. Who do we talk to? What are the supports that are in place? At the beginning of COVID, we were all worried about, should we do loaner wheelchairs anymore? Because we loan wheelchairs to people all the time. And, what if we touch the wheelchair, will we contaminate ourselves, or will our ushers be in? We all now know that COVID is not transmitted through those kinds of touch. But the truth of the matter is we should have been cleaning those wheelchairs all along, right? And so it just brought that issue back up to the surface. Yeah, I think what you're saying is really true, Steve. I think it's the way you plan for as much as you can in advance and then be ready for what you can't plan for.
Well, that is just the perfect close for this session, and I think the entire day of Event Safety TV. Plan for what you can and be prepared for the rest. That's a bumper sticker right there.
Betty Siegel, run to the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Copyright this thing.
Quick. It's always so much fun to talk to you all. You make me think a different way, because that's thinking about emergency evacuation, thinking about life safety issues and how those mesh with or sometimes conflict with the needs of people with disabilities is really a fascinating thing to explore on a day like today.
On a day like today. We are so grateful for you. Thank you so much for joining us for this. And thank you, audience, for joining us for this last session of this. I believe we'll have a quick closing after this, and we will see you there.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Betty.
Thank you.
Well, there we have it. So this is your official wrap up from me and Danielle. Thanks for sticking around today. We appreciate your comments in the chat, your participation, your attention, because we're pretty webinared out. We imagine that you are as well, but the learning can't stop because, well, other stuff isn't stopping either. So we appreciate your time, your attention, all that good stuff. Danielle, we have a few things to tease here.
A couple of announcements.
Yeah, more learning.
So we'd love for you guys to join us in where, Steve? Where are we going to meet? March 20 through 24?
Here, not inside my mug, but we're going to meet at Rock Lidditz in Lidditz, Pennsylvania. It's Pennsylvania Dutch country. You too can drive behind a horse-drawn carriage. It's cool.
Yes, and March in Pennsylvania is still winter, so dress accordingly. You can register for that at our website, so that's eventsafetyalliance.org. Just follow the links. That's also where you find other interesting things about the ESA and what we have going on. Which is a lot. So, Steve, what about our special announcement today?
Yeah, so our special announcement, just to remind you, we introduced the Global Crowd Management Alliance, which is in fact global. So wherever you are watching this, you too can be a part of GCMA. The website for more information is thegcma.com. We had to use the GCMA because, like, there are golf course management groups and other URLs out there. So it is thegcma.com. And, well, I don't think I have to belabor the point that crowd management is an important issue for lots and lots of reasons in lots of places around the world. So if that's something that is relevant to your work, check out the Global Crowd Management Alliance. We are gearing up and could use more smart friends. So join us.
So again, we are so grateful that you attended today. We would love for you to become part of the ESA if you're not already. So that same website, eventsafetyalliance.org, become a member. It's only $25 a year. And because we just passed Giving Tuesday, please feel free to support the ESA and the Behind the Scenes charity from ESTA that provides mental health services to people in our industry, which continues to be a vital resource. Also, you could support us by buying a cool shirt or a hard hat with the ESA logo on it, or any other items that you can find in our merch store. All right. We hope to see you in March. Stay safe out there in the world. Come to Lidditz.
We want to see you in person. We know what your video image looks like, but we don't know if you have, an actual
Feet?
being.
Well, we hope you guys enjoyed Event Safety TV.
Thanks very much. Be safe out there.
Bye-bye.